Cerelon, the whispers of the Forbidden Land. We didn't know what we were doing when we landed on Cerelon. Not really. Humanity had only broken into deep space travel a few decades prior, and our star maps were still rough sketches drawn in pencil filled with blank spaces and guesswork. Cerelon wasn't even supposed to be inhabited, at least not according to the Centauri Accord star charts. But it was, and not by just any species. The Dogma's Edge, our scout ship, had sent back a transmission that sounded more like a fever dream than a report. Ruins ancient and massive, covered in strange living symbols and beings. Unlike any cataloged race, when the Galactic Council heard our claim, they laughed. To them, we were the new kids, loud and impulsive, always chasing legends like eager fools trying to earn a seat at the galactic table. Finding the Vari, the keepers of the eternal tongue, the song-born rulers of 1,000 sectors, wasn't just unlikely. It was impossible. The Vari were myths, ghost stories used to frighten alien children. They had supposedly vanished eons ago, consumed by their own decadence or swallowed by some spiritual cataclysm. Yet we knew what we saw. I still remember the moment our 10-person team, half scientists, half security, stepped onto Cerelon's soil. The air was thick, humid, strangely musical. There was a vibration in it, like a chorus so low you could almost hear it with your bones rather than your ears. Each step we took made the ground seem to hum beneath our boots. The ruins towered over us, pillars of black stone that refused to reflect light, crumbling walls that seemed to shimmer when we weren't looking directly at them. The symbols on the walls weren't carved. They were alive. They shifted subtly, glowing faintly when we approached, almost singing, though too quietly to catch. Every rational part of my mind told me this was a trick of the atmosphere, a side effect of alien technology degrading over millennia. But my instincts, the older, deeper part of me, said otherwise. This place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. At the heart of the ruins stood a dome so black it seemed to swallow the starlight itself. Instruments failed to register its composition. Cameras returned only static when aimed at it. No matter what angle we approached, it appeared to be staring back at us. Inside, we found statues, towering figures with faces like lions and wings spun from glass-like crystal. They stood with heads bowed, arms outstretched, as if offering gifts we could not yet understand. The locals came soon after, small, hunched figures with silver skin and violet eyes. They called themselves the Null. They didn't speak words, but sang harmonies, weaving notes into meaning. Our translators failed. Our universal comms blanked out. But one thing remained constant. Whenever they looked at us, at me, specifically, they would hum a rising tone that made the statue's eyes glow faintly. The others thought it was coincidence. A trick of frequencies. I wasn't so sure. Because when they sang, I didn't just hear notes. I heard words deep in my bones. Words that didn't belong to any human language, but still somehow spoke to me. The blood of old walks again. I didn't tell the others. Not yet. I just smiled, pretending awe as Dr. Janeth Hahn, our mission leader, clicked away on her scanner, taking samples and photographs. I laughed when the Null offered fruits that literally sang when bitten. When the walls of the temple shivered under the breath of an ancient, invisible wind, but inside, a terrible certainty was growing. On the third night, drawn by something I couldn't name, I wandered beneath the dome alone. The vibration in the air thickened into something almost tangible. The walls were covered in carvings, and when my fingers brushed them, golden lines raced across my skin. My throat seized, and without thinking, I began to chant words. I had never learned notes. I had never practiced. It wasn't a song. It was a summoning. The air around me trembled. I felt the statues stir ancient memories leaking into the atmosphere like smoke. And somewhere far beyond Cerelon, far beyond this galaxy, something heard me, and it began to awaken. The blood song Awakens. When I stumbled back into the camp that night, the others barely looked up from their work. They hadn't felt it, the shift in the air, the way the ground itself had seemed to sigh beneath the weight of something ancient rising. To them, the ruins were just another archaeological jackpot, but to me, they had become something else entirely. A heartbeat, slow and patient, waiting for the right pulse to stir it back to life. I said nothing about what I had done in the dome. What could I say? That I had sung in a dead language and the stones had listened? That the statues had seemed to breathe when I spoke their forgotten hymns? I told myself it was better this way. I wasn't even sure I believed it yet. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the heavy humidity and the strange fruit and the unrelenting hum in the air were getting to me. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations. But the next morning shattered those fragile rationalizations. The temple gates, massive slabs of black stone that had refused to budge under every analysis and assault we had tried, stood open. No sound, no warning, just open, beckoning. And outside, the Null knelt, hundreds of them arrayed in silent, perfect rows, heads bowed, hands pressed against their silver chests. They weren't bowing to the temple, they were bowing to me. For a long, aching moment, I simply stood there, too stunned to move. The rising sun caught in their eyes, turning violet into molten gold. Their mouths open, not in words, but in a single rising harmony. The same note they had hummed before, only now magnified 1,000-fold. And when that sound washed over me, the statues within the dome glowed in response, their crystalline wings shimmering with life. Dr. Janeth Hahn shouted orders. She tried to gather the team, tried to restore some sense of scientific objectivity, but it was useless. Instruments failed again. Communications died. The very atmosphere seemed tuned to a different frequency, now one we could barely comprehend. And me, I felt like I was on fire, not with heat, but with memory. Images, not my own, flooded my mind. Thrones built from living stone, armies singing their battle cries into the void, oceans of stars bending in reverence to something beautiful and terrible all at once. I collapsed. When I woke, I was inside the temple. The walls around me pulsed gently alive with flowing symbols, and I could understand them not as words, but as feelings crystallized into form. Resurrection, reunion, reckoning. Janeth hovered over me, her face a mixture of fear and fascination. She demanded to know what was happening. Why the Null wouldn't speak to anyone else. Why they treated me like some kind of divine herald. I had no answers for her. None that would make sense. All I knew was that something inside me had changed. The blood they had sung about, the blood of the Vari, wasn't just metaphorical. It was real. Somehow across thousands of years and millions of light years, a spark of their lineage had survived. Hidden dormant, buried in the tangled, reckless gene pool of humanity. And now Cerelon had recognized me. Or more terrifyingly, it had been waiting for me. We stayed for 2 more days. The scientists documented feverishly. Janeth tried desperately to re-establish communications with Earth, hoping for guidance, for reinforcements, for extraction. But the Null wouldn't cooperate. They had become distant, focused entirely on me. They sang when I moved. They sang when I slept. They sang to the stones, to the trees, to the very air. Weaving a symphony I could almost understand. Brenner, one of the security officers, grew increasingly paranoid. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered one night during his shift. "Those freaks stare at you like you're some kind of god, and when you're not around, they go dead like puppets whose strings are cut." He wasn't wrong. The Null weren't just worshipping, they were waiting. Then came the signal from the sky. It started as a flicker, a rhythmic blinking among the stars, unnatural, deliberate. And the Null responded as if called by an ancient bell, rising in a low unified chant that shook the very ground. The statues within the temple stirred again, their heads lifting ever so slightly, crystalline wings shuddering in anticipation. Janeth was terrified. She ordered the perimeter locked down, demanded I make the Null stop, but I couldn't. The song was no longer a ritual. It was a command, a summons. And somewhere far above us, someone had heard. Hours later, long before dawn, the sleek silver shapes of council ships descended silently from the upper atmosphere, blotting out the stars like carrion birds. 3 vessels, council emissaries. They came dressed in diplomatic robes, pretending peace, but the fear in their movements betrayed them. They knew what we had found. They knew what Cerelon was, and more importantly, they knew what I had become. Their arrival would not be the salvation Janeth had hoped for. It would be the beginning of the war. The first invasion. The council emissaries disembarked with all the pomp of self-proclaimed overlords, their envoys gliding down from silver landers on fields of projected light. There were 3 species among them. The Alari, smooth-faced and glass-eyed. The Vortons, massive and scaled, sneering with every breath. And the Perun, gelatinous beings whose clicks and light pulses formed their language. They moved like they owned the ruins, like they had come to rescue us from our ignorance. But it was fear that tainted their movements. They recognized the architecture. They recognized the resonance in the air. And most of all, they recognized me. The Alari delegate approached me, posture stiff, but voice unnervingly soft. "You must stop this," he said. "You don't understand what you're awakening." The Vari were not kings, they were tyrants. They were I answered quietly, feeling the hymn vibrate in my bones. The delegate flinched, an involuntary twitch betraying his terror. "You are being used," he pleaded. "That blood in you, it's dangerous, it's corrupted. We buried this world for a reason." I stared at him, something ancient and steady burning behind my human eyes. "You weren't protecting the galaxy," I said. "You were protecting yourselves." He didn't deny it. That night, the council showed their true faces. They didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They sent assassins. 3 Vorten soldiers, armed with silenced weapons, crept into my quarters as the ruins slept. No warning, no ceremony, just cold, calculated execution. But the temple was awake now. The moment their boots touched the floor, a pulse of golden light erupted around me, hurling them backward. Their weapons melted into slag in their hands, screaming against physics itself. The statues along the walls, ancient guardians of a forgotten empire, stirred ever so slightly, their heads tilting toward the intruders. The message was clear: he is under our protection. The Vorten soldiers were dragged away, broken and weeping, their minds fractured by something deeper than pain. The council called it a malfunction, a misunderstanding. They apologized profusely, weaving lies with bureaucratic grace. But the damage was done. The Null hissed at them now, refusing to sing in their presence. Even Dr. Janeth Hahn, ever the skeptic, stopped trying to smooth things over. She pulled me aside after the incident, her voice shaking. "What are you becoming, Alex?" she whispered. I had no answer. I didn't even feel fully human anymore. My blood sang old songs, memories that weren't mine burned behind my eyes. I could hear the past living in the stones around me, feel the hopes and betrayals of an empire older than memory itself. And deep in my dreams, I saw it, a star chained in golden hymns, a prison not to contain something evil, but to protect the universe from something worse. The Vari hadn't fallen from internal rot. They had sacrificed themselves to stop a horror too great to fight directly. And now that horror, the dissonant, was stirring once more. The council realized they were losing control. The Alari delegate returned the next morning with an ultimatum, thinly veiled in silk words: relinquish the site to council authority or be declared in violation of precursor artifact protection protocols. Janeth argued, protested, but I could see the futility. They didn't come here to negotiate. They came to erase, to bury the past again before it could sing too loudly. But it was too late. The Null were already building something, a structure outside the temple gates, not with tools, but with songstones floated into place under the resonance of harmonized voices. Crystals grew from thin air, weaving themselves into elegant, spiraling forms. A tower, an antenna for a message not yet finished. When Janice saw it, true panic filled her eyes. "This is insane," she said. "We're not supposed to meddle. We're observers, not participants." But I knew the truth she couldn't accept. We had never been observers. From the moment our boots touched Cerelon's soil, we were participants in a story older than humanity itself. And then came the Sci-Fi. Council warships, sleek and bristling, with containment drones descended from orbit. They weren't here for diplomacy anymore. They were here for scorched earth. The Null reacted first, their songs growing urgent, desperate. The tower's growth accelerated its spires, reaching skyward like pleading hands. And within me, the hymn, the blood song, surged to a crescendo. I stood atop the temple steps, watching the council ships array themselves like vultures. Janeth grabbed my arm. "Stop this, Alex. We can still shut it down. We can still walk away." But the stones beneath our feet had already chosen. I could feel it humming up through my bones, through the air, through the trembling strings of reality itself. The blood had returned, the song had begun, and nothing would stop it now. The flame of the second dawn. The sky over Cerelon cracked with thunder as the first council bombardments began. Explosions rocked the outskirts of the ruins, sending showers of ancient stone into the air like confetti at a funeral. The Null sang louder, defiant, their voices weaving barriers of sound that shimmered against the onslaught. But it was clear we couldn't hold them forever. And still the tower kept growing. Driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I left the temple behind and ventured deeper into the ruins, following a pull in my chest as real as gravity. Down winding stairs through halls where the walls bled light until I reached a chamber, hidden far beneath the dome. The air was thick here, almost solid with resonance. Symbols pulsed faintly along the walls, golden and alive. At the center of the chamber stood a statue unlike the others, a figure clad in ancient Vari armor, seated on a throne of shattered crystal. He didn't move, he didn't breathe. Yet he was aware. I knew this was no guardian. This was a tomb, the tomb of the composer. I stepped forward, each breath heavier than the last. The golden cracks running across his armor glowed faintly in rhythm with the beat of my heart. Above his chest, embedded within the broken armor, floated a crystal shard, small, pulsing alive. The second hymn. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave this place and pretend I had never heard the song, never felt the pull, that I could still choose a different path, a human path. But the moment my hand touched the crystal choice vanished. The world shattered, not outwardly. Inwardly, I saw it all in a torrent of images and feelings, so overwhelming I thought my mind would tear apart. Cities grown from sound and stone armies that marched to symphonies of power stars cradled in cages of song. The rise and fall of the Vari, not from decadence, but from a terrible mistake, the birth of the dissonant. A Vari scientist once celebrated had dared to craft a new form of music, a sound not in harmony with the cosmos, but against it. A sound that unmade reality itself. It had spread like a cancer, twisting minds, corrupting worlds. The Vari had fought it, bled for it, and when they realized they could not destroy it, they chose instead to erase themselves, to vanish, to become myths. The second hymn was their legacy. Not a weapon, not a throne, a burden, a memory of everything they were and everything they had lost locked away, waiting for someone stubborn enough, reckless enough to bear it. And that someone was me. I fell to my knees gasping as the composer's form dissolved into motes of golden light merging with me. The crystal embedded itself in my chest, pulsing with a rhythm that was no longer entirely human. My veins glowed faintly under my skin, lines of power etched in the shape of songs forgotten by all but the stones. I should have been terrified, should have collapsed under the weight of it, but instead a fierce clarity filled me. The Vari hadn't been tyrants. They hadn't ruled by fear. They had harmonized worlds, woven civilizations into living symphonies. Their fall wasn't hubris, it was sacrifice. They had died to contain the dissonance they themselves had accidentally unleashed. And now that containment was breaking. As I stood in the silence of the tomb, the dissonant chorus whispered at the edges of my mind, broken and wrong. I knew they had heard me. I knew they would come. But I wasn't alone anymore. I carried 1,000 memories in my bones. I carried the last hope of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. I carried the second hymn. When I returned to the surface, the tower had finished growing. Its tip pierced the sky, glowing with runes and resonances only I could read. And above us, the council warships loomed, readying another strike. Janeth met me at the temple steps. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, with something between fear and awe. "You're not you anymore," she whispered. "I am," I said softly, "but I'm more than me too." She reached out, hesitated, then let her hand fall. "Alex," she said, voice cracking, "this isn't just about you anymore. The council will never stop. You know that." "I know," I said, "but neither will we." The ground trembled beneath our feet. Across the ruins, the Null lifted their voices once more, singing the foundation of a song older than stars. And I felt it respond not just here, but across the galaxy. The buried temples, the sealed memories, the forgotten choirs. They were waking, and the second dawn had begun. When the sky trembled, the sky above Cerelon tore open with fury. The first council strike fell like a hammer. Kinetic impactors slamming into the outskirts of the ruins, reducing centuries-old monuments to rubble. Explosions rippled outward in rolling waves of fire and smoke, lighting the morning with unnatural suns. The Null screamed in unison, their harmony shattering into discord as they fled toward the heart of the temple grounds. I stood atop the temple steps, the tower behind me blazing like a second star. The second hymn thrummed in my chest, urging me to act to answer the violence raining down upon us. But I hesitated for a heartbeat. I saw Janeth crouched among the rubble, her face streaked with dust and blood. I saw Brenner shouting commands as he rallied the few security personnel still able to fight. And I saw the Null. The beings who had knelt to me trusted me, sung me into who I was now dying. A drone squadron swept overhead, sleek and predatory. They dropped containment fields, searing nets of blue energy designed to immobilize anything alive. I watched as one field captured a cluster of Null elders. They collapsed instantly, their bodies convulsing under the electromagnetic pulse. Something inside me broke. The hymn shifted. It was no longer the serene music of rebirth. It became something raw, jagged, ancient and terrible. A wrath song not meant to heal but to avenge. I stepped forward, raising my hands. The air trembled, bending away from my touch. The Null who could still move raised their voices, sensing the change. Their song aligned with mine, desperate and fierce. When I opened my mouth, it wasn't words that came out. It was the sound of a star screaming. The blast rolled outward from the temple, a golden shockwave of pure resonance. The first drone squadron disintegrated midair, their metallic frames folding inward like paper under a blacksmith's hammer. Council ground forces just breaching the perimeter were thrown back, their armored suits crumpling their weapons, shattering. Above the warships faltered. Shields flickered and died. Engines coughed and guttered. Two ships spiraled downward, trying and failing to regain control before slamming into Cerelon's oceans with twin pillars of steam and debris. For a moment, a brief blinding moment, the battlefield fell silent, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. But war is never that simple. The surviving warships regrouped. More drones fell like black rain. Orbital platforms locked onto the tower, charging for another barrage. And amid it all, I saw him, Lord Commander Vrex, the architect of the Council's intervention. The butcher who had ordered the suppression of ancient ruins for centuries. He stood among his troops, encased in gleaming armor, his reptilian Vorten eyes burning with hatred. "You are an abomination!" His voice thundered across the battlefield, amplified by his suit. "You are the echo of a disease we purged. You will not survive this day." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. The tower behind me spoke for me, pulsing once with a resonance so deep it made the clouds tremble. Vrex raised his gauntleted hand and the order was given. Everything came at once. Containment fields, plasma bolts, sonic disruptors calibrated specifically to silence him frequencies. The Council had come prepared, wielding every weapon they had forged in terror of a future where the Vari might return. And still we sang. I led the Null in a new hymn, one born of defiance and sorrow. Their voices rose around me like a wall, like a shield. The tower answered, weaving our song into armor. But we paid a price. One by one, I saw them fall. Brave Null warriors, their silver skins rupturing under alien weaponry. Ancient keepers crumbling into dust as they held the line for one more note, one more breath. Even Brenner, paranoid gruff, Brenner, stood his ground until a containment bolt took him in the chest, ending his defiant stand in a burst of blue light. Janeth fought too. I saw her pulling wounded Null to safety, shouting herself hoarse against the cacophony of war. I wanted to save them all. I couldn't. Wrath burned brighter in me than grief. I unleashed the second pulse. This time the ground itself responded. The stones sang, the ruins shook, roots of light burst upward, entangling Council. War engines and dragging them into the earth. The sky bled fire as warships lost control and tore themselves apart under invisible forces. Lord Commander Vrex roared in fury and charged, leading a squadron of Vorten elites toward me. They crashed through the chaos like a tidal wave of rage. I met them head-on. The hymn weaponized the air between us. Their armor peeled away under invisible frequencies, their minds fractured under notes too pure, too true for hatred to withstand. Vrex fought longer than the others, his strength fueled by sheer will. But even will must bow to harmony. As he fell to his knees, armor cracked, blood seeping from his ears and mouth. He locked eyes with me one last time. "You will drown us all," he rasped. "No," I whispered. "We will teach you to hear again." The final burst of song shattered his body into motes of golden dust, carried away by a wind older than memory. When it ended, the battlefield was silent. Wreckage smoldered, the wounded groaned. Null survivors, few and broken, gathered around the ruins of the tower, singing soft laments for the fallen. The Council's forces were shattered, their ships drifting powerless in low orbit, their soldiers scattered or dead. Janeth limped to my side, her face hollow with exhaustion and grief. "Was it worth it?" she asked. I looked around at the ruined stones, at the smoking craters, where friends had fallen, at the blood-stained soil that had once been sacred. I didn't answer with words. I sang a low, mournful note that carried through the broken city, through the ashes and tears, through the pain and death. And slowly the survivors joined me, because Cerelon was not dead, because hope like song does not die so easily, because the second hymn was not a cry of conquest. It was a promise, and we had only just begun to keep it. The final chorus. In the aftermath of the battle, Cerelon lay in ruins. The great tower, once a beacon to the stars, now stood cracked and leaning its surface, scorched black by the fury of the Council's final assault. The temple grounds were littered with the bodies of the fallen Null, and human alike mingling with the shattered remnants of ancient monuments. The sky, once ablaze with fire and destruction, now hung silent and heavy as if mourning. We had won, but it did not feel like victory. Janeth sat by the broken steps of the temple, her injuries hastily wrapped, staring blankly at the horizon. I sat beside her for a long time without speaking. Words seemed hollow after what we had endured. Around us, the surviving Null worked, quietly gathering their dead, singing low, haunting melodies of mourning and remembrance. Their songs wove through the ruins, stitching sorrow into the very stones. And overhead, across the void of space, a ripple moved, a call answered. The second hymn, the beacon we had lit, was not meant only for Cerelon. Across the galaxy, in the dark corners where ancient temples slept and forgotten relics lay buried, something stirred. On the shattered moon of Jira, a vault door groaned open, spilling golden light into the void. In the burning deserts of Alarkan, sandstorms began to whisper the names of kings lost to time, and in the deep orbit of Theta Prime, a derelict. Vari archive blinked back to life, its memory banks humming with songs long thought erased. The galaxy trembled beneath the weight of awakening, but it wasn't fear that swept across the stars. It was memory, and with memory came reckoning. The Council tried to suppress the truth. They issued emergency broadcasts denouncing us as dangerous radicals, as corruptors of ancient evils. They declared martial law in dozens of sectors. Entire fleets were mobilized to contain the spread of what they called the Chorus Plague. But it was too late. Once a song is heard, it cannot be unheard. Colonies that had lived under the Council's thumb for generations began to remember the old stories. Stories that suddenly sounded less like myths and more like memories. Species that had long accepted their place in the galactic order began to dream of something else. Something freer, something more beautiful. The last choirs began to rise. Whispers carried across pirate channels and black market data nets. A commune of exiles on New Vega sang the hymn of reclamation, driving a council outpost to surrender without firing a shot. On the gas giant moons of Tehran, floating cities reoriented their structures to resonate with ancient frequencies. Entire sectors went dark, not from destruction, but from refusal. The galaxy was dividing, not into war, into music, into memory, into freedom. And at the heart of it stood Cerelon, broken but alive. Janeth and I spent our last day together walking among the ruins. She limped, leaning on a salvaged staff, but she refused to stay behind. I carried the second hymn inside me, now pulsing softly with every heartbeat, guiding my steps. When we reached the top of the temple, we stood in silence. Below us, the Null had begun building again. Not towers of stone and crystal this time, but gardens. Living structures grown from song and memory, harmonized with the land, breathing with the planet itself. "It's beautiful," Janeth whispered. "It's only the beginning," I said. She turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "You could stay, help rebuild." I smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I can't," I said. "There's more out there, more temples, more memories, more songs waiting to be heard." She nodded, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You'll be alone." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll never be silent." At dawn, the Null completed their final gift to me, a vessel not built but sung into existence. It was beautiful, a ship woven from light and resonance, alive with the echoes of the Vari's hopes and dreams. No engines, no weapons. It moved through song alone. As I boarded, Janeth handed me a transmitter, a relic from Earth, battered but functional. "In case you ever want to talk," she said, forcing a smile. I took it, knowing I probably never would. The ship rose without sound, lifting me into the sky, past the broken remains of the Council fleet, past the layers of clouds scorched by war, into the endless black where the stars waited. And the stars were singing. They shifted, subtly forming paths visible only to those who could hear the old songs, coordinates hidden in melody roads carved by memory. I followed them, not with maps, not with navigation arrays, with hymns. Each note that pulsed in my chest opened a new way forward, carrying me deeper into the places where even light dared not tread. Slipstreams bent around my vessel. Black sectors whispered my name. And as I sailed beyond Cerelon, beyond humanity, beyond fear, I understood. I was no longer just Alex Rorschach. I was the voice of the forgotten kings. I was the living hymn, and the chorus had only just begun.